5 days after John Lennon died, Paul McCartney quietly flew to Dylan's farm. Dylan didn't speak much, but the words he said broke Paul. December 13, 1980. A private airstrip outside Minneapolis, Minnesota. Cold enough that breath turned to fog. Paul McCartney stepped off a chartered plane wearing sunglasses he didn't need. The sky was gray, the light weak, but his eyes were too raw to expose. He told almost no one where he was going. Not his wife. Not his bandmates. Just a single phone call to Bob Dylan's unlisted number. 3 words. "I need to come." Dylan had said one word back. "Come." No one met Paul at the airstrip. He found a rental car waiting with keys in the ignition and handwritten directions on the dashboard in Dylan's unmistakable scrawl. 40 minutes north. Turn at the oak tree. No sign. You'll know it. Paul drove through landscape that looked like the end of the world. Flat white fields. Bare trees. Sky the color of old concrete. He'd barely slept since December 8th. Hadn't eaten properly. Couldn't listen to music. Every radio station was playing Beatles songs and talking about John, and he couldn't bear it. He found the farmhouse exactly where the directions said it would be. Small. Wood frame. Smoke rising from a chimney. A single light in one window. Dylan's truck parked outside, covered in snow. Paul sat in the rental car for 10 minutes, engine running, heat blasting, staring at that lit window. Wondering what he was doing here. Wondering if he should turn around. The front door opened. Dylan stood in the doorway. Didn't wave. Didn't smile. Just stood there, backlit by the warm interior glow, waiting. Paul turned off the engine and got out. They didn't shake hands. Didn't embrace. Dylan just stepped aside and let Paul walk into the house. The door closed behind them with a soft, final sound. Dylan didn't explain himself. He never did. The farmhouse interior was exactly what Paul expected and nothing like what he'd imagined. Sparse. Worn furniture. Wood-burning stove crackling in the corner. Books stacked everywhere. A guitar leaning against a chair. Coffee pot on a small table. 2 cups already poured, steam rising. Dylan gestured to one of the cups. Paul took it but didn't drink. His hands needed something to hold. They sat. Dylan in an old wooden chair near the stove. Paul on a couch that had seen better decades. Between them, maybe 6 feet of space that felt like an ocean. The silence stretched. 1 minute. 2. Paul could hear the wood popping in the stove. Wind against the windows. His own heartbeat. Finally Paul spoke. His voice came out rough, like he'd been screaming. Maybe he had been. He couldn't remember. "I don't know why I came here," Paul said. I couldn't be anywhere else." Dylan nodded slowly. Didn't say anything. "Everyone keeps asking me how I feel," Paul continued. The words were spilling out now, uncontrolled. "Reporters. Friends. Family. They want me to say something. Something meaningful. Like I'm supposed to have an answer for what it means that John is gone. Like there's supposed to be some." He stopped. His throat closed. Dylan waited. "We hadn't spoken in years," Paul said, quieter now. "Not really. We'd see each other at things. Be polite. But we hadn't been us in so long. And I kept thinking there was time. That one day we'd fix it. That we'd sit down and remember what we were before everything got complicated. But now there's no time. There's no more time, and I never told him." Paul's voice broke completely. He put the coffee cup down because his hands were shaking too badly to hold it. Dylan leaned forward slightly. Picked up his own cup. Took a slow sip. Put it back down. "What didn't you tell him?" Dylan asked. First words he'd spoken since Paul arrived. Paul looked up. That I forgave him. That I understood. That none of it mattered anymore. The fights. The breakup. All of it. I just wanted my friend back. And now he's gone and I never said it. Dylan stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the white expanse of winter, his back to Paul. You think he didn't know? Dylan said. How could he? I never said the words. Words are the least important thing two people can share. Paul stared at Dylan's back. What's that supposed to mean? Dylan turned around. His face was unreadable in the dim light. You made music together. For years. You wrote songs that changed the world. You know what that means? It means you already said everything that mattered. You said it in ways words could never touch. But I never told him. You told him every time you harmonized with him. Dylan interrupted, his voice still quiet but carrying weight. Every time you wrote a middle eight that made his verse better. Every time you showed up to the studio even when you were angry. That's what you told him. That's what he heard. Paul shook his head. You don't understand. We fought. We said terrible things to each other. The last real conversation we had was about business. Lawyers. Money. That's what he's going to remember. No, Dylan said. He walked back to his chair. Sat down. Leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. That's what you're going to remember. Because you're still here. John doesn't carry that anymore. He's done with it. You're the one who has to figure out how to put it down. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. The silence that followed felt different. Heavier. Paul closed his eyes. I don't know how to do that. He whispered. Neither did I. Dylan said. Paul opened his eyes. What? Dylan reached for his guitar. Pulled it onto his lap. Didn't play it. Just held it. His fingers rested on the strings without pressing down. Woody Guthrie, Dylan said. You know I went to see him. 1961. He was dying. Huntington's disease. Could barely move. Couldn't play anymore. I was just a kid. 20 years old. I traveled to New Jersey to meet him because he was my hero. The reason I picked up a guitar in the first place. Dylan's fingers moved slightly on the strings. Still no sound. I sat with him for an hour. I wanted to tell him what his music meant to me. How it saved me. How it showed me what songs could do. I wanted to say all of it. But when I got there, when I was sitting in that hospital room, I couldn't speak. I just sat there like an idiot. Holding my hat. Staring at the floor. What happened? He looked at me. Couldn't talk much by then. But he looked at me and he said, You got a guitar? I told him I did. He said, Then play me something. So I did. I played him one of his own songs. Song to Woody. Wrote it about him. And when I finished, he smiled. Just a little. And he said, Keep going. Dylan finally pressed down on the strings. One soft chord. Let it ring out and fade. I never saw him again. He died a few years later. And I spent years thinking I should have said more. Should have told him everything. But you know what I realized? I did tell him. I told him by learning his songs. By carrying them forward. By doing what he did. Taking the anger and the beauty and the truth and turning it into music that mattered. Paul was crying now. Not sobbing. Just tears running down his face in the firelight. John knew. Dylan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Trust me. He knew. Away from the spotlight, Dylan made a choice no one expected. They stayed at the farmhouse for 3 days. No phones. No newspapers. No television. Just two men who'd spent their lives being voices for millions, sitting in silence and learning how to be quiet. Dylan cooked. Simple food. Eggs. Bread. Coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the 1960s. They ate without talking much. Paul would start to speak sometimes, start to ask questions about music, about writing, about how Dylan dealt with the weight of everything. But Dylan would just shake his head slightly and Paul would stop. On the second day, Dylan handed Paul a guitar. Play something, Dylan said. I can't. Didn't ask if you could. Asked you to play? Paul took the guitar. His hands felt foreign on the neck. He started to play Let It Be, and had to stop after 4 chords. His fingers wouldn't work. Or maybe his heart wouldn't. Dylan didn't say anything. Just waited. Paul tried again. This time he played something he and John wrote together in 1963. Something simple. Something from before the world got complicated. His fingers remembered even if his mind was struggling. Dylan listened. When Paul finished, Dylan picked up his own guitar and played the same song back, slower, different rhythm, his voice turning the melody into something ancient and new at the same time. They played for 2 hours. Not performing. Not recording. Just 2 guitar players in a farmhouse in Minnesota, speaking the only language that actually mattered. On the 3rd day, Paul woke up before dawn. Found Dylan already awake, sitting by the window with coffee, watching the sun not quite rise yet. I should go, Paul said. Dylan nodded. Yeah. Thank you. For letting me come here. For not making me talk about it. Didn't let you do anything, Dylan said. You came because you needed to. I just didn't stop you. Paul put on his coat. Picked up his bag. Got halfway to the door before Dylan spoke again. Paul. Paul turned. Dylan was still looking out the window. Didn't turn around. The music you made with him. It's going to outlive all of us. Every word you wanted to say to him, it's already out there. In the songs. In the harmonies. In every kid who picks up a guitar because they heard Yesterday or Strawberry Fields and realized music could do that. Dylan finally turned. Looked directly at Paul. That's your forgiveness. That's your apology. That's everything you never said. It's already said. Forever. You just have to let yourself hear it. What followed stayed with everyone who witnessed it, long after the sound faded. Paul didn't respond. Couldn't. He just nodded once and walked out into the Minnesota morning. The drive back to the airstrip took 40 minutes. Paul didn't turn on the radio. Didn't need to. For the first time since December 8th, he could hear music in his head without it breaking him. He got on the plane. Flew back to England. Went home to his family. 3 weeks later, he wrote, Here Today, a song about John. About everything he never said. About forgiveness and loss and the weight of words left unspoken. He never told anyone about those 3 days in Minnesota. Dylan never mentioned it either. That's how they both operated. The important things stayed quiet. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Years later, decades actually, a journalist asked Paul about how he dealt with John's death. Who helped him through it? Paul got quiet. That same look Dylan had by the window. Finally he said, Someone reminded me that I'd already said everything that mattered. I just had to learn how to listen to it. The journalist asked who? Paul just smiled. Someone who understands silence. Bob Dylan never gave interviews about Paul's visit. Never confirmed or denied it. That's how it should be. Some moments aren't meant for the public. They're meant for the 2 people in the room. The guitar. The silence. The understanding that words are the least important thing 2 people can share. Paul McCartney carried those 3 days with him for the rest of his life. Not as a story to tell, but as a weight that finally lifted. Dylan didn't fix his grief. Didn't erase it. Just showed him it was okay to carry it differently. The guitar Dylan let Paul play? Paul asked if he could buy it. Dylan said no. Said it belonged in the farmhouse, where it could remember what happened there. Where silence taught 2 of the greatest voices in music history that sometimes the most important thing you can say is nothing at all. In 1987, Paul was in New York recording. Someone asked him about influences. About who taught him the most about songwriting. He listed the obvious names. Chuck Berry. Little Richard. Buddy Holly. Then he paused. And Dylan taught me about silence, Paul said. About what you don't play being as important as what you do, the interviewer pressed. Paul didn't elaborate. Never did. But those who knew, the handful of people who understood what happened in that Minnesota farmhouse, they knew what he meant. Dylan hadn't given Paul answers. He'd given him permission. Permission to carry grief without explanation. Permission to forgive without fanfare. Permission to remember John not through guilt but through the music they'd made together. 20 years after that winter, Dylan was asked in a rare interview if he'd ever helped someone through loss. "Everyone helps everyone," Dylan said, characteristically cryptic. "We just don't always know we're doing it. Can you give an example?" Dylan smiled that half smile. "No. The guitar still sits in the farmhouse. Dylan kept it there even after he sold the property. Made it part of the sale agreement. New owners don't know its significance. They just know it's an old acoustic that the previous owner insisted stay with the house. Sometimes, on winter mornings when the light comes through the windows the way it did in December 1980, the current owner says the guitar sounds different. Like it's remembering something. Like it's carrying a conversation that never needed words." Paul McCartney performed, Here Today, for the first time in 1982. He's sung it hundreds of times since. And every single time, before he starts, there's a moment. A pause. A silence. Those who know say he's not thinking about John in that moment. He's thinking about 3 days in Minnesota. About coffee that tasted like the 1960s. About a man who understood that the heaviest truths are carried quietest. About silence being the only language grief really speaks. Dylan never attended any memorials for Lennon. Never made a public statement. Never wrote a tribute song. That's not who he is. He helped the way he helps, quietly, privately, in ways the world never sees. But in that farmhouse, in those 3 December days, Bob Dylan gave Paul McCartney something no one else could, the understanding that he'd already said goodbye. He'd said it in every harmony, every lyric, every moment of music they'd created together. The words Paul wanted to say, they were already sung. John had already heard them. The rest was just learning to forgive himself for being human.